Joining us now to discuss what happened over the weekend is University of Notre Dame political science professor Jim Curry. He's also a former political science professor at the University of Utah. Jim, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on again.
All right, let's talk about Lindsey Graham. For those who aren't steeped in politics, I think most people will have at least seen or heard news clips of him over the years. What kind of a figure was he in American politics?
Well, he was a major senator and a major committed public servant. One of the things that people who know Lindsey Graham know about him was that he was a lifelong bachelor. Essentially, his life was the Senate, and you could say he was married to the Senate. And he was interesting, too, in that he had this long history of both bipartisanship and working across the aisle on a variety of issues, but also being a partisan warrior. And we saw that dual nature throughout his career. He came into Congress in 1994 as one of Newt Gingrich's Republican revolutionaries, and he was an impeachment manager during the Clinton impeachment in the 90s. And he'd taken a lot of flack during the Trump years for his sharp partisan posture at times. But he was always able to sort of balance that being a partisan warrior with being someone who could work with his colleagues on the other side. He'll most likely be remembered for his work in foreign policy, though. He was a leading member of the hawkish wing of the GOP. He was consistent in his positioning, even during the Trump years where isolationism took a little bit back within the Republican Party. But he was consistent in his views of a strong, robust, interventionist, military forward American foreign policy, and you saw that up to his final days.
Yeah, he was just in Ukraine speaking with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, a really big advocate for them.
Yes, that's right. And he supposedly had been working on a deal on Capitol Hill to provide more financial support to Ukraine and to the Ukrainian military to continue that fight against Russia. And arguably, he had a big influence in keeping a Trump administration that isn't as interested in Ukraine as maybe the Biden administration was. He deserves a lot of credit for keeping them involved in that military operation there.
He famously said when President Trump was running for the Republican nomination the first time in the 20-teens, he famously said, if we nominate Trump, it will destroy the Republican Party and we will deserve it. He obviously evolved over the years, became a really big Trump ally. Can you talk about that evolution?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you see in Lindsey Graham is what you typically see in politicians who can last a long time in the national stage, and that they have to evolve as their party evolves or they find themselves on the way out. And so Lindsey Graham was one of these senators who opposed Trump, as many of them did in 2017 and in 2016, becoming the Republican nominee and winning the presidency. But if you want to stay in politics and you want to keep having influence over the things you care about, you have to find a way to work with who's put in office beside you, what happens in your party. And he evolved as so many Republicans did over the years.
South Carolina is presumably a red state. I'm not totally familiar with the rules of replacing him there. But what do you think this does now for the makeup of the Senate for, I guess, the rest of the year, but also going into the midterms?
It'll stay a Republican seat. South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster will get to appoint a replacement for Lindsey Graham, who will hold on to the rest of Lindsey Graham's seat through the end of the year. Graham was actually up for re-election, and so there'll be a new process to nominate somebody new from the Republican side, but he'll be replaced at some point this summer. This still complicates the work that the Senate Republican majority is doing. They've already been down a seat with Mitch McConnell having been in the hospital and in rehab, and now they're down another seat until Lindsey Graham gets replaced, which can make things difficult in the short term. But in the long term, this is a fairly safe Republican seat and will stay in Republican hands.
I also want to ask you about political decorum. I saw a lot of heartfelt tributes to Senator Graham over the weekend. I also saw a lot of criticisms on several different social media platforms, people not too upset with the news. Just recently when Robert Mueller died, we heard kind of a similar thing from President Trump, where he was saying he's glad he's dead. The fact that these sort of figures are dying and we're seeing a lot of really harsh criticism, what does that say about where we are right now?
I think that tells you exactly where we are right now, where our politics has become fairly combative, and in certain circles, it's almost encouraged to be sort of harsh in this way. And Lindsey Graham's a great example of this. He was always a lightning rod. especially for people on the left and for Democrats. When he last ran for re-election, there was a ton of money poured into his race for the Democratic nominee, who ultimately didn't have much of a chance. But because he was running against somebody that is so disliked on the left, he was able to raise over $100 million in his campaign against him. And so, unfortunately, this is what we see now. Or if you don't like somebody, or if you disagree with them, you're going to get this kind of harshness upon their passing, which people will justify in so many ways. But the guy, that's where we are in our politics at the moment.
Able to gather, he was pretty well liked among Senate colleagues. Is that right? Can I assume that?
He was liked. At times he would, if you talk to people off the record, at times he could annoy people because he was persistent, and he was sharp in his views. He was not shy about saying what he thought and talking. But at the end of the day, I think most people in Washington liked Lindsey Graham. He was there a long time. He had a lot of friends and connections. He was famously part of a group of senators called the Three Amigos with the late Senator John McCain and Joe Lieberman, who worked together in this bipartisan fashion on foreign policy. So it was certainly liked, and I think that's what you're seeing with a lot of the outpouring that we're seeing from Washington, is this is somebody who was, in his long career in Washington, was generally well liked.
Did he, I'm remembering he did, but I'm going to ask you, did he run for president himself? He did, right?
He did. In 2016, he was one of the many Republicans who were seeking that nomination. His campaign didn't go that well. That's where a lot of the sharp critiques you see of what he's saying about President Trump come from, when he was running against then candidate Donald Trump for the Republican nomination in 2016. Is actually where we see a lot of the sharpest critiques that we see from Republicans, because if you recall, there was something like 25 semi-viable candidates in that race. So he did try in 2016, didn't work out. But at the end of the day, this is somebody who's defined by his work in the Senate.
And in terms of his passing, when you first heard about it over the weekend, what was your reaction?
A little surprised, right? He's obviously he's in his 70s. He's not a young man. But within the context of the Senate, 71 is not terribly old. And so not the person you might have expected or anticipated hearing about passing. So suddenly, especially given the fact that he's been so active and so involved, and not with a lengthy history, at least of public knowledge of him being unhealthy. And so it was somewhat shocking to hear that Lindsey Graham had passed away.